My stepson tried to steal our home. By sunrise, he lost everything. If you think 75 years old means slow, means forgetful, means easy to fool, my stepson thought the same thing. He handed me a stack of papers to sign at my own kitchen table, smiled at me like I was already gone, and told me it was just insurance paperwork. By sunrise the next morning, he didn't have a house, a marriage, or a single dollar of the inheritance he thought he'd already won. Stick with me because this one still makes my hands shake when I tell it. Before I go any further, if you enjoy stories like this, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you know that people still want to hear from an old woman with a story to tell. Now let me tell you about the night I found out exactly who my stepson really was. My name is Judy. I'm 75 years old, and I've lived in this house for 41 years. My husband, Walter, and I built a life here, raised his son from his first marriage like my own, buried 2 dogs in the backyard, hosted 41 Thanksgivings under this roof. Walter passed 6 years ago. Cancer took him slow the way it does, and in the last months when he could barely hold a pen, he made sure everything was in order. The house was mine, free and clear. His pension, his savings split fairly between me and his son. Walter believed in fairness above almost everything else. It was the thing I loved most about him. His son, I'll just call him the stepson here because after what happened I don't feel like giving him the dignity of a name people will remember, was 38 years old when his father died. He'd been in and out of jobs his whole adult life. Real estate here, a failed restaurant there, some cryptocurrency scheme that cost him his savings and, from what I heard, cost 2 of his friends theirs too. He was charming though. I'll give him that. He had his father's smile and his mother's gift for making you feel like the only person in the room. I loved him like my own son for over 20 years. That's what makes this so hard to say out loud even now. After Walter died, the stepson started visiting more. At first, I thought it was grief bringing us closer. He'd come by on Sundays with coffee, ask about my knees, my blood pressure, whether I was eating enough. He'd sit with me in the living room and talk about his father, and sometimes we'd both cry, and I thought, well, at least I still have this. At least I still have him. But grief has a way of making you blind to things you'd normally see clearly. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment things shifted. It was about 8 months after the funeral. He brought his wife with him for the first time in months. I'll call her the wife because she doesn't deserve a name in this story either. Not after everything. She was polite, complimented my garden, asked about the house's history. I thought she was just getting to know me better. I didn't understand yet that she was appraising it. The visits became more frequent after that. And they always came with a reason. The furnace needs looking at, Judy, let us take care of it. Have you thought about what happens to the house if something happens to you? Wouldn't it be easier if we were on the deed just in case, just so nothing gets tied up in probate? I want you to understand something about me. I am not a stupid woman. I taught high school English for 31 years. I diagrammed sentences for teenagers who didn't want to be there, and made them love Shakespeare anyway. But love does something to your judgment that intelligence can't always override. I wanted to believe my stepson loved me. I wanted to believe he was looking out for me the way his father would have wanted. So when he started talking about protecting the house, I listened. The paperwork started small. A power of attorney just for medical emergencies, Judy, just so someone can make decisions if you can't. I signed it because it made sense and because Walter had always trusted his son with the big decisions in the family, and because I was tired, and because grief makes you want to hand the heavy things to someone else for a while. Then came the trust documents. He explained it to me in the kind of soft, patient voice you'd use with a child. He said a living trust would protect the house from taxes, from lawyers, from complications. He said it was standard that everyone his age was doing this for their aging parents, that it wasn't really about anything changing, just paperwork to make things smoother later. He brought a folder of documents to the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in March, laid them out like a hand of cards, and slid a pen toward me. I want to tell you that some warning bell went off in me right then. Didn't, not fully. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way his wife hovered by the doorway instead of sitting down, like she didn't want her fingerprints anywhere near the moment. Maybe it was the fact that he'd never once brought a lawyer, never suggested I get my own attorney to look anything over, always insisted his was handling everything for the family. I told him I wanted a few days to read it over. His smile flickered just for a second before he caught it. Of course, he said. Take your time. No rush at all. But I saw that flicker. 20 years of loving someone doesn't erase your ability to notice when their mask slips. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with that folder and read every page twice. Most of it was dense legal language I didn't fully understand, and that unsettled me more than anything else. If it was as simple as he claimed, why did it need 40 pages to say it? The next morning I called my late husband's cousin, a woman named Pauline who'd spent 30 years working as a paralegal at an estate planning firm 2 towns over. I hadn't spoken to her much since the funeral, but she remembered me warmly, and when I described what was in the folder, her voice changed completely. Judy, she said, I want you to bring me copies of every single page. Today if you can. I did. She read through it at her kitchen table with a red pen in hand, and by the end, her jaw was tight in a way I'd never seen on her before. The trust wasn't what he'd described at all. Buried in the language, dressed up in legal terms designed to look routine, was a clause that would transfer the house into a trust where my stepson was named sole trustee, meaning he'd have full control over the property, able to sell it, mortgage it, or transfer it without needing my signature on anything ever again. There was another clause revoking my existing will and replacing it with new terms that cut out 2 of my closest friends, whom I'd named as beneficiaries of small keepsakes and a modest cash gift, and redirected everything, every last cent and every possession in this house, to him and his wife alone. And the power of attorney I'd already signed months earlier wasn't limited to medical decisions at all. It was broad enough that, combined with these new documents, he could have quietly sold my home out from under me, and I would have had almost no legal ground to stand on. I sat in Pauline's kitchen and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. Not sad. Not even angry, not yet. Just still, the way the air gets right before a storm breaks. Judy, Pauline said gently, if you'd signed this by the time you realized what happened, it would have been extremely difficult and expensive to undo. Some of this, depending on how fast he moved, might not have been undoable at all. I drove home in silence. I didn't cry. I kept thinking about Walter, about the promise I'd quietly made at his hospital bed to keep this house standing, to keep it safe, to keep it ours. I thought about how his own son had looked me in the eye every Sunday for 8 months, eaten my cooking, hugged me at the door, and all the while been drafting the paperwork to take everything out from under me the moment I trusted him enough to sign. But here's the thing about being 75 years old and having spent 31 years managing classrooms full of teenagers who thought they were smarter than you. You learn patience. You learn how to let someone believe they're winning right up until the second they're not. I didn't confront him that week. I didn't even mention Pauline. Instead, I called my own attorney, a sharp young woman named Priya who Pauline had recommended, someone with no connection whatsoever to my stepson or his circle. Over the course of the next several days, working quietly and carefully, Priya and I did 3 things. First, we had me formally and irrevocably revoke the power of attorney I'd signed months earlier, filing the revocation with the county recorder's office so there would be an official, dated, public record that it no longer existed. Second, we drafted an entirely new will, ironclad and specific, reaffirming my original wishes for my friends and adding detailed language anticipating exactly the kind of undue influence claim that families like mine sometimes try to make later. Third, and this was Priya's idea, we had the house itself placed into a trust of my own design, with me as sole trustee and an independent successor trustee named who had no relationship to my stepson at all, a former colleague of mine from the school district, a woman named Doris who I trusted for 30 years and who agreed without hesitation. All of this took about 10 days. I kept having Sunday coffee with my stepson and his wife the entire time. I complimented the flowers she brought. I let him ramble about how important it was that I finalize things soon before anything happens. I smiled and nodded and said I was still thinking it over, still reading the paperwork closely, being careful the way any responsible person would be. He had no idea. That, I think, is the part that satisfies me most looking back. Not the outcome itself, but the 10 days where I sat across from him at my own table and let him believe he was patient, generous, waiting kindly for a foolish old woman to catch up. On the 11th day, everything was signed, sealed, and filed. My attorney had copies delivered to the county recorder, and everything was airtight, dated, and a matter of public record before the sun set that evening. That night, I called my stepson and asked him to come by the next morning. I told him I had decided about the paperwork. He arrived at 8 a.m. sharp with his folder in hand, that same practiced smile on his face, his wife trailing a step behind him like she already knew this was going to be the morning it all paid off. I invited them in, poured coffee, and let them sit down at the kitchen table where all of this had started. I laid my own folder down instead of touching his. I told him calmly that I knew exactly what his trust documents would have done. I told him about Pauline, about Priya, about the revoked power of attorney now on record with the county, about the new trust with Doris as independent successor trustee, about the new will that named my friends as I'd always intended and left explicit, notarized language documenting the attempted manipulation, should anyone ever try to contest it after I was gone. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. His wife's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. He tried to talk his way out of it the way he always had. Called it a misunderstanding, said the language was standard, said he'd only ever wanted to help me. I let him finish. Then I told him something his father said to me once, near the very end when he suspected, though I didn't fully believe it at the time, that his son might not be the man we'd hoped he'd become. Walter said, "Judy, love someone with your whole heart, but never hand them the keys to your whole life. A person's true character only shows itself once they think no one's watching closely enough to notice." I told my stepson I finally understood exactly what his father meant. By sunrise the next day, the story had already unraveled entirely on its own, the way these things sometimes do once you stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. His wife, who I later learned had pushed him hard toward this entire scheme once his last financial venture collapsed and their own debts became unmanageable, packed a bag that same week and left him, apparently unwilling to stay married to a man who'd not only failed at every scheme he'd chased but had now been formally, publicly caught trying to defraud his own elderly stepmother. Word travels fast in a small family, and faster still in a small town. His siblings, Walter's daughter from an earlier relationship and her husband, who I'd always been close with, found out everything within days and made it clear exactly where they stood. He lost their trust entirely, lost the co-signer they'd once been for a business loan he'd been quietly counting on, and lost, in the end, nearly every relationship he'd built his identity around. The house, the inheritance, the family standing he'd assumed would simply fall into his lap. Every bit of it slipped through his fingers in the span of about 12 hours, once the truth was sitting in the open instead of hidden in 40 pages of legal language on my kitchen table. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard how far the fallout spread. I loved that boy for over 20 years. Some small, stubborn part of me still hoped, right up until that morning at the kitchen table, that I was wrong about him, that there was some explanation that made this all a misunderstanding after all. There wasn't. And I've had to make peace with the fact that the version of him I loved may never have fully existed at all, or existed only in the moments when it was convenient for him to perform it. But I still have this house. 41 years of memories are still standing exactly where Walter and I built them. My will says exactly what I want it to say. My friends will be taken care of the way I always intended. And Doris, bless her, checks in on me every single week now, not because she wants anything from me, but because that's simply who she is. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this: getting older doesn't mean you stop deserving to be treated with respect. And it certainly doesn't mean you owe anyone unconditional trust just because they share your name or your family or your holidays. Read everything. Ask questions. Get your own advisor, someone with no connection at all to whoever's asking you to sign something. And never, ever let anyone rush you at your own kitchen table. Walter used to say the measure of a person isn't how they treat you when they need something, but how they treat you once they think they've already got it. My stepson showed me exactly who he was the moment he thought the house was already his. I'm just grateful I found out in time to make sure it never was. Thank you for listening to my story tonight. If it meant something to you, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.